Heyo. So we're doing a quick video here on how to teach the Intro to Yoga class at the pad. I think the mentality we want to take when teaching this class is one that recognizes that everybody is different and that most of the people that take this class are probably going to be very new to yoga. So somebody who is a yoga teacher and has been doing yoga all their lives, at least for me, I think it's a little bit difficult sometimes to take a step back and recognize that the person I'm talking to might not have the same body of knowledge that I do, or the same life experiences, or maybe even the same belief systems, whether those are, about themselves and what they can do in the world, or religious, etc., etc. And then recognizing those things, you can then tailor the class, tailor the explanation of things to anybody, right? So you tailor it in a way that anybody can digest, that anybody can understand, and that anybody can relate to. So I think that's the most important part as you get going, just recognizing that everybody starts at a different place and that you have to meet them there and bring the information to them in a way that is digestible for them. So in terms of the class structure, I think it's a good idea to give a little bit of background on yoga, talk about the sutras, talk about how the Vedas mentioned yoga, but there was no concrete kind of organized way of just going and reading through a text about yoga. And so Patanjali came along and wrote the Yoga Sutras. So from there, yoga was around for a long time, and it kind of started dying off. And then Krishnamacharya came along, revived it, gave it new life, started taking on pupils, and so that's where Iyengar, Pattabhi Jois, Desikachar came along, and they all have kind of their own different style of yoga that developed, and that's probably yoga as we know it today here in the Western United States. There's Iyengar yoga and there's Ashtanga, et cetera, et cetera. So from there, I would go on to talk about the 8 limbs of yoga. And even here, this is a thing where it's a little weird. Like in Hindu tradition, or maybe even in yogic tradition, I don't know, it might make sense to call them the 8 limbs of yoga, but that just seems like a deformed animal with 8 limbs to me. Is yoga an arachnid? Like, what's going on? So whenever I talk to people about yoga and the 8 limbs of yoga, I will very quickly move away from calling it the 8 limbs of yoga, and I'll just say it's like, yeah, there's 8 aspects to it. Sometimes I'll say like it's a philosophy for living, right? And for living well. It's supposed to help you live well, and there are 8 different parts of it to think about. And so then, the first one, the one that I'll probably lead off with, would be asana, because that's the one that everyone's familiar with, everybody knows about, and explain that asana is intended to help with having a healthy body. And the whole reason having a healthy body is that it allows you to live life more fully, to live a more fulfilling life, to do the things you want to do with your body. For example, to be able to sit in meditation for extended periods of time. But beyond that, like, you don't want to be, an elderly person that can't bend over and pick stuff up when they drop it, or that, has trouble getting in and out of the shower, that kind of thing. So having a regular yoga practice and taking care of your body and paying attention to your body is, definitely necessary for living, a fulfilling life, for living well. So from there, we can go on to talk about pranayama. And so, in short, it is control of the breath. And there's a lot of stuff that follows from that, right? Like all of the things you can do with pranayama. I think getting too deep into it with an intro to yoga class might be intimidating for them, but you can talk about how the fact, how there is this force, prana, you can explain it as that thing which gives everything life. It's also, described as the thing that pervades all of reality. But yeah, I think, it's easy for people to think about it as like, okay, well, it's kind of like a soul, but it's that thing, it's in everything and it gives everything life. And so with breath, you can move that around, right? And you can kind of uh, come into a greater level of awareness about prana and how prana moves through your body, through pranayama, through breath work. And again, here is a point at which you kind of have to give it to them and allow them to, pick up what makes sense to them and what's useful to them, and to set aside what doesn't make sense for now. So I think that is the least exclusive way or alienating way of teaching yoga. Bringing these concepts forward, and then, if somebody doesn't get what prana would be in your energetic body, and they really don't want to go there, okay, well, feel the breath as it goes into your lungs, as it moves through your torso. Notice how different it is to breathe consciously than to not breathe consciously, and what a difference that makes in your experience. And if you do that for an extended period of time, what a different state of mind that leaves you in. That could be where they start with pranayama. It's totally on them. And then, yeah, from there you can talk about the yamas and the niyamas and how they are more of, a standard of behavior, a standard of what attitude to have. The yamas about how you behave in relation to the outside world. So, do no harm. And again, all of these things are a rabbit hole. So ahimsa is simplified to do no harm, but it's more than that. There are situations where harm can't be avoided. So then what do? Well, you behave in a way that's considerate and that takes all beings into account, and that is responsible. Or, we could talk about the niyamas and talk about, kind of how that's more of an internal set of attitudes to have about yourself and about how you comport yourself, how you see yourself, how you understand yourself on a more internal basis. And then there's kind of, I kind of, in my mind at least, I kind of draw a line when explaining yoga, and that line is between the first four limbs, aspects of yoga, and the last four being pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, because those are more ethereal. Those are more difficult to understand for your random everyday person who grew up watching The Simpsons and playing football. So pratyahara, one of the best ways I've found to describe it, and again, you probably have one too, as long as it's something that maybe they can relate to, is, there's a lot of talk about flow these days, kind of getting in that state of flow. And, everyone has had that experience at some point where you're doing a thing, whether it's, skiing or, heck, it could be like sewing, or you're just doing a thing and you're fully absorbed in it and you feel like you're just like moving through and it's happening and the entire rest of the world has been drowned out. Pratyahara is similar to that, right? Pratyahara is kind of withdrawing from outside stimuli to reach a state in which your mind is no longer like, squirrel, squirrel. Instead, the mind is focused on a thing and the senses are following what the mind is focused on. So the senses are kind of no longer pulling at your attention. You're no longer being distracted from whatever is happening. You're focused in. And it's not something that you can just sit down and think, okay, I'm going to do pratyahara right now. I'm going to, like drown everything out and focus in. It's kind of a state that induces itself. So I would talk about that, and then dharana and dhyana. I think Desikachar does a really great job at explaining dharana and dhyana. So dharana being concentrating on an object and having that object be the entire center of your focus. So you're literally just paying attention to that object in a state of meditation. And then dhyana comes from that point at which you've made contact with the object by focusing on it. Dhyana is kind of the next step, which is So you've made contact and then you make connection in dhyana. You start to become intimate with the thing you are focusing on. You start to maybe recognize, oh, this thing and I are not so much different from one another. And then from there, samadhi is, you could say it's enlightenment, and people would understand that because it's a word they understand. Um, but I think to give it more meat, another thing that I sometimes say is the understanding that everything is one, right? And that's also a big cliche phrase. Um, but you can talk about it. You can kind of like hit it from different angles. You can say, okay, well, if you think about it, at the atomic level, we're all just made of atoms. At the molecular level, everything is made of atoms, and my hand is a bunch of atoms, and this table is a bunch of atoms, and the floor we're standing on is a bunch of atoms, and so it's all energy. And who are we to say that the world does not behave in such a way that that energy um, is also a part of, that energy has a spiritual aspect of some sort, perhaps. And in that sense, we are all one. And who are we to say that in a state of samadhi, you're not able to come to some understanding of that, right? To some realization that like my body is one and the same with everything around me, and that I am this individual person. Yes, I see myself as an individual person, and yes, I see you as an individual person. But in some sense, we're all part of the same thing. Um, One metaphor for it is when you look out at the ocean on the beach and you see the waves coming through, you see one wave come and then crash, and then another one rises, swells, and crashes. And so you have all of these individual waves. But ultimately, a wave is not just a wave. A wave is the ocean still. And so samadhi is kind of some like deeper, deep down emotional knowledge of that. You can think about it conceptually and have all of these intellectual concepts and tell yourself like, oh yes, I believe this thing because I thought about it in my head and it makes sense. But then there's this other level of understanding a thing. It's emotional knowledge, and that's when you truly believe something deep down. And so I think samadhi might be some understanding of that oneness at your core. So that would be possibly one way to explain it. You can explain it whatever other way you want, as long as you keep it tangible, as long as you keep these, these very ethereal, very foreign concepts somewhat relatable to the students in the class. And then I think once we've talked about those things, then we can kind of take a step back and prepare them for, we've given them the overview of yoga, and now we can talk about the things that they're going to expect in a class as they get started, because this is all like probably drinking out of a fire hydrant, and we need to tone it down and just say, okay, this is where you begin, right? So what to expect in a yoga class? You should bring your mat. You shouldn't drink a gallon of water within, a half hour of going to yoga, because you're going to have to pee the entire time and it's going to suck. You definitely want to wear athletic clothes, not too baggy, because, sometimes your leg's up there. And if you've got baggy pants on, then it's going to come all the way up to, your crotch, and you might be embarrassed, and it's just not going to work out. So talk about what to wear, the best, maybe you have some suggestions about like the best articles of clothing that work for you. What to do, what to say. So what to say, it's a big one, right? Talk with your teacher about your injuries. Tell your teacher, hey, I'm really new to yoga. This is my, first class, or whatever it may be, because that gives them a lot of information about how they need to teach you yoga, that they need to be keeping an eye on you, that they might need to give you corrections that other students might already know. Though it is true that often I go to yoga and see people who have obviously been doing yoga a long time, because they get most things right, and then they just do one or two things, and I'm like, God, if you keep doing that, you're going to break yourself really badly. So, maybe not just the first time students that need a careful eye. But coming back to what to say, talking about injuries, talking about the fact that you're new to yoga, asking questions is a really big one. And I think that a lot of the time, students will come away with a lot of questions at the end of class and not feel like it's okay to ask them. Or maybe they'll have a question mid-practice and not think it's appropriate to ask the question mid-practice and forget it by the end of class. And so I really respect teachers that make some room in their class for someone to like catch their eye or raise a hand and ask a question about alignment in the pose. I think maybe that's not appropriate for all classes, but you can tell them that's not totally out of the realm of what's possible. Let them know that in some classes it might be possible to ask the teacher a question mid-class. So that's that. And then what not to do, right? So don't bring your cell phone into yoga. Don't leave your cell phone on in the yoga studio. Definitely don't get up to go check your cell phone in the middle of class, that kind of thing. Leaving before Shavasana. Everyone has somewhere to go, something to do, somewhere to be, right? But if you're setting aside a certain period of time to go do yoga, set aside that whole block of time. Leaving 5 minutes, 10 minutes early isn't really going to set you ahead in the day so much that it's not worth doing the full practice of yoga. And so then at that point, you can also explain why Shavasana is so valuable and so important. It's kind of this time at the end of practice for everything to assimilate, for the body to wind back down, for you to possibly find some altered state, some altered mental state that has been facilitated by your hour of practice. So I've definitely found that in Shavasana, I'm not, sometimes I go somewhere else, and I don't know how to explain it any more than that, but it's definitely an experience unto itself. And it's best not to get up as everybody is dropping into that, make a bunch of noise, grab your stuff, and, leave. So anything else you guys have that is kind of a tip of what not to do in yoga, you can share it. And then developing kind of a strategy about, well, how am I going to start incorporating yoga into my life? So you can explain that everybody starts in a different place. Everybody's body is different as they're beginning yoga. And so they kind of need to do some finding, like what yoga is going to be best for me, what feels good in my body. I think as we get into yoga, the path of least resistance is definitely the best way to go. You don't want somebody who hasn't done yoga much to start doing yoga that is really uncomfortable for them. So, usually the yoga 1-2 class or a gentle yoga class, or maybe like yin yang is going to be a good place to start for a lot of people. But there might be some super athlete who, really loves power flow, and that's going to be where they want to start. Like, okay, we'll start there. And then I think another really, really important part of someone who's getting into yoga, incorporating yoga into their lives in a healthy, sustainable way, is preventing injury. So it's really important to talk about the kinds of things we do with our body without thinking about it that are going to injure us in the long run. Big one is forward folds. So a lot of people are going to be in the habit of forward folding and trying to touch their toes, because that's, what they think about when they think of yoga and they see people forward folding, touching their toes. They're going to try to do that with their lower back instead of forward folding from the hip sockets and keeping kind of integrity in their lower back, in their lumbar spine. So talking about that, and maybe even showing them, giving a visual for what the difference is and having them feel it in their own body so they understand, okay, well, this is the kind of forward fold motion I want to shoot for, and then understanding this is the kind of forward fold motion I don't want to shoot for, because it's going to help me stay healthy in the long run. And then explaining that there's a lot of other alignment cues out there like that. Some of them are about feeling the pose more fully. Some of them are about not injuring yourself. Some of them are about allowing your body to breathe more efficiently by not scrunching in your chest or whatever it might be. I think it's really important to let them know that they don't want to hurt themselves. So to pay attention to alignment. And when a teacher tells them like, oh, do this thing for alignment, it's likely because the teacher is looking out for them to make sure they don't get hurt. Another one in terms of alignment that is really important is back bends. So some people are super backbendy and other people are not. But regardless of how backbendy you are, there is an integrity in a backbend that is really important. So if you're doing a backbend, the abdominals, your core needs to be supporting that backbend. You can't just dump into the backbend, and so that ensures that your spine is being taken care of. I think a great example to teach that and to also kind of hit two birds with one stone, or at least maybe not the best metaphor since we're talking about nonviolence in yoga, but is the chaturanga, right? And chaturanga push up into up dog, basically the whole vinyasa flow. And this is something that a lot of people who've been doing yoga for a long time still do, which is dumping kind of their entire lower body weight down when they're an up dog, instead of having a strong contracted core and having a kind of a measured, controlled back bend. So if you're just going to let your hips drop, you got to let them drop all the way to the floor so that they're resting on the floor, and then your hip bones and your pelvic bone are pressed onto the floor, and so all of the weight from your legs is resting on the floor. If you drop your hips but they're not touching the floor, and you're just kind of like, you're doing this with your shoulders and just allowing your back to, bend as it will, you're going to injure yourself in the long run. So, a proper up dog is this very controlled back bend in which you're trying to get the back bend into your upper back so that you're not dumping into your lower back. So maybe I ranted about that for too long, but that's kind of the explanation you want to give, and give it with visuals, and then hopefully they understand, okay, this one pose that I'm going to do in every freaking yoga class I go to, or at least most of them, this is a pose I need to look out for and I need to do correctly, instead of just like going through the motions without really thinking about what my alignment is doing, and how, thinking about the little details of the pose. And then how do I, everyone wants to develop, they want to grow, they want to progress in some way. So I think that as part of their yoga strategy, we also want to give people the tools to understand that yoga is not an A to B, like today I'm this good and a year from now I will be this good kind of thing. Rather, it's a thing to just do in your life and allow it to influence your life and to change who and how you are, however it will, right? I know for a fact I'm a better person when I do yoga regularly than not. Not better in the sense that, I'm more capital G good, just in the sense that I'm in a better mood and that I'm nicer to other people and I don't lose my temper as often. So for me, it's been a lot less about, trying to have yoga goals, and more about, okay, well, let's go do yoga and just notice how it affects my life. And it will, and it does. And, I think that the whole aspect of trying to get to somewhere as if you're not already complete, as if you're not already, the intelligence that it takes for your body to have life and, be this amazing living organism, like that is a miracle in and of itself. Like, you are miraculous. You don't need to do anything more to be really good at yoga. You just need to go do the yoga, and your body is, it's just gonna, you're good enough. I think that's what I'm trying to communicate. You want to let people know they're good enough and that they don't need to get anywhere else to be good enough in yoga. And then after that, after having spoken about that, you can lead through, a basic asana practice. So sun salutations, a chaturanga breakdown, if you haven't already done it, how to use props and modify. So, a good example of that is if you're taking people into a forward fold, standing forward fold, and they can't touch the floor. Okay, well, there are blocks, and you can use those blocks to aid you so that, you're not just kind of dangling there. You could also show them how to use their shins in that position, but then the risk there is that their butt's going to stick out and they're going to compromise their hamstring attachment points. I'm not sure if you want to go into that, but you could. Um, and then do some sort of a breathing exercise, maybe like a simple pranayama exercise. And then finally, I think the other thing to touch on, and you can touch on this throughout class, you can touch on it towards the end, is the fact that, yeah, there is some spiritual, traditional, cultural stuff that's going to be difficult to understand for somebody who's new to yoga. So namaste is a great example of that, right? And even the English translation that's commonly thrown around of namaste is difficult to understand. The light that is in me, sees, recognizes the light that is in you. We don't literally have light inside of us. It is a spiritual light. It's a metaphorical light. It is something that is not tangible to the Western mind. So sometimes what I will say is, okay, this isn't exactly the meaning of it, but you can think about it in terms of, I am alive, and I recognize that I am alive, and I have life, and that is a very special, unique, miraculous thing, and I see you, and I see that you are alive, and that you have that life force inside you as well. Whatever that is, it gives us life. And so maybe that makes it more tangible. I don't know, but it's stuff like that, right? Or another example is Agni. If you're talking about the niyamas and you start talking about Agni and tapas and all of that stuff, there is not literally fire inside of somebody, but there is something to be said for creating heat in your body and how that does help your body cleanse. And then there's also kind of beyond just bodily tapas, like the discipline that it takes to just be the person you want to be and to live the life you want to live and develop the habits that you want to develop. That is more tangible than Agni, the internal fire that cleanses your body of rubbish. Well, what is the rubbish in my body? It just gets like difficult to grasp. So if you want to, at the end of class or throughout class, just touch on these things, but then also come back and try to make them relatable. I think that's a really good thing to do. And recognize, yeah, like you guys might not understand this. This might not make sense to you. It might sound weird. It might kind of sound out there, and that's okay. Take what you will, leave what doesn't work for you right now, and just start where you are. So yeah, I think that's kind of the class that I would take people through. Obviously, you as a yoga teacher have the freedom to add or subtract the things that you think are important to teach somebody about yoga. There might be something that's missing that's, kind of something we should have absolutely included, something I should have talked about. And if there is, and you think that's a really important thing to include, throw it in. Yeah, I think that's it. Hope you're having a great day. And namaste.